Hello and welcome once again to one of Human Synergistics webinar sessions. Very happy to see you and happy to have you joining with us today. My name is John Van Etten of Human Synergistics, and I'm very happy to be joined today by Sabine Gromer of Magnolia Tree, a Human Synergistics accredited practitioner, quite experienced doing wonderful things with HS tools and data, and very happy to have her joining us today to talk about a very important key topic these days about anti-fragility, how we help organizations to be adaptive and deal with uncertainty in these ever-changing times. So thank you so much for joining me today, Sabina. I know this is a key topic people are interested in.
Thank you so much, John. And hello, everybody who is joining us live. I will uh, share a couple of thoughts around the topic of anti-fragility with you, but at the same time, there will be a number of moments for you to reflect. And there will be a couple of reflection questions. So just be prepared to use the chat function if you want to, just take your own notes as we go through the material. The topic of anti-fragility was actually introduced to me by a futurist who we work with for many of our clients when it comes to AI and thinking about scenarios for the future. And he said to me, Sabine, I believe what senior leaders and senior executives really need these days is actually to understand the concept of anti-fragility. At that point in time, I had never heard of anti-fragility. And in fact, if I could, I would ask you all to just raise your hand if you have heard the name or the phrase anti-fragility before. Certainly for most people in the room, when I talk about it, it seems to be fairly new concept. And I got really intrigued because I thought in management science and management knowledge, I'm quite firm, and I do have a quite a broad field of knowledge. But clearly, I had never heard of anti-fragility. So for today, I would like to answer the question of what is anti-fragility? Why is it important for executives, especially in this current zeitgeist? But before I go into it, and before I really answer the question of anti-fragility for you, I would actually like to set the scene a little bit differently. And the way I want to do this is I actually would like to read to you a wisdom story from China, an old Chinese wisdom story, which is called The Lost Horse. I thought, John, you would appreciate it since you are quite a proficient horseman yourself. So
Right. Thank you.
the story goes like this: The Lost Horse, or The Secret of Happiness. A long, long time ago, in a village in the north of China, there lived a man who owned a beautiful horse. So beautiful was this horse that people came from far and wide to admire it. And they all agreed that the man was blessed because he owned such a magnificent horse. Maybe, the man replied, but what appears to be a blessing might also be a curse. One day, the horse broke free and disappeared. People came to express their sympathy for the misfortune. Maybe, he replied, but what appears to be a curse might also be a blessing. A few weeks later, the horse returned, not alone, but with an entire herd of wild horses. By law, all these new horses belonged to the man, making him rich. The neighbors came to congratulate him on his good fortune. Now you are truly blessed, they said. Um, this they were all very certain about. Maybe, he answered, but what appears to be a blessing might also be a curse. Not long after, his son, his only son, tried to ride one of the wild horses. He was thrown off and broke his leg. The neighbors came again, as neighbors do, to express their sympathy. It could only be a curse. Now they were really certain. Maybe, said the old man, but what appears to be a curse might be a blessing. Just a week later, the king passed through the village and conscripted all able bodied young men to go to war against the people from the north. It was a terrible war. All young men from the village were killed. Only the man's son survived because his broken leg had kept him from being drafted. Since then, the people in this village have said, what appears to be a blessing might also be a curse. And what appears to be a curse might be a blessing. So I would like to take this opportunity and this story to invite you, even though we cannot directly talk to one another, but to actually reflect on your own life's journey. Quite often, we believe that we make plans that go a bit like the upper half of the slide. We have a goalpost in mind and we anticipate a little bit of up and down, but in general, we believe that our plans will work out. And I love this slide because isn't it our experience that most of the time it's more the universe planned for us that drive the outcome and the goal? And with these ups and downs that maybe we can't quite foresee, I would like to invite you to just reflect about a challenging phase in your own life. In hindsight, was it a curse or a blessing? And what helped you survive it? If you'd like to, you can use the chat function. We will see responses, but I would just put a timer on. I just want to give you about 2 minutes just to reflect on these questions and see where your answers lie. And again, feel free to share it with us if you like. So just two minutes of silence.
Hmm.
All right, thank you, everybody. One of the first lessons of antifragility is that it is important to take the time to reflect, because that's the only opportunity to uncover real growth. So that's your first lesson on antifragility. The second lesson of antifragility is that there is a metaphor around our life. It's just like climbing a mountain, and we have different base camps and, of course, different circumstances. Oh, I just saw a comment come in.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Should I pull
Yeah.
this up? Yeah, we had a few.
Fired from a job led
Thank
me to
you.
find work that is greatly fulfilling. Exactly. The failure of my marriage opened many windows. Both of you, I can absolutely resonate. I can absolutely resonate with that. And sport helps me in the process. Yeah, fantastic. So this idea around climbing a mountain is something that Viktor Frankl, the really great scholar in psychology, defined. He used the analogy of mountain climbing quite a lot in his work. Viktor Frankl, he was together with Sigmund Freud and Adler. He was one of the leading minds around psychology from Vienna. And most of you might know him actually. And I think he symbolizes antifragility extremely well, because he's a Holocaust survivor. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he wrote a book that I think the English title is called A Man's Search for Meaning. So quite a fascinating life journey, but one of the, for me, most impactful quotes and statements from him is what he said around stimulus and response, because he said between the stimulus and the response, there is a space. And in this space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I love that quote because I sincerely believe that whatever life events you're faced with, whether it's a divorce, whether it's being let go from a job, whether it's an illness, what he really embodied is that it's so important that we define our own response, because our own response to that event will shape the outcome so much more than the event itself. And a business example that I like to use often, because I found it so striking, actually comes from the COVID years. In fact, it comes from the first lockdown period during COVID. And I now live in Vienna, but I'm originally from Munich. And it was quite striking to me to have these two examples. In Vienna, the shops just closed, including the booksellers. So all shops were just closed. It was lockdown period. In Munich, bookshop owners actually gathered virtually to talk about the implications of lockdown. I think for most people, it was very obvious that people would now want to read more and have more time to read. I guess the bread baking was not quite so
Fulfilling.
distance the reading was. And what they decided is they decided that their competition, their online competition, will benefit from this unless they actually have a different response. And they created a hotline that you could call, and within 2 hours, the bookshop nearest to your house would actually deliver your book order. So I love this story because it's out of a business context, but I think it illustrates so strongly how the event itself does not shape the outcome. Our reaction and response to it does shape it a lot more.
Yes.
And for me, that's the essence of anti-fragility. So that's the lesson number 2 around anti-fragility. And
Absolutely.
the third point, John, by the way, right, if you have a question or if you want to slow me down or pace me in any
No,
way, please.
I don't want to slow you down. No, I just love it. It's a great connection to our tools and models. We use very much that same kind of, event, reaction, outcome, causal concept in our tools. And really, what we're measuring at every level is essentially patterns of behavior. It's how we respond, it's how we react. And that is the one thing that we can, right? The one thing that we can control and choose is how I respond to the situation. So understanding how our business responds currently, how our teams behave, that reaction is, as you said, absolutely predictive of the outcomes, and also the thing that we can control, learn from, and develop moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And the third input that I have for you before I would define anti-fragility for all of us, and we would dive deeper into it, actually comes from improv theater. It's an activity that I really love at improv theater, where to really do improv very well, so to play with someone else in an improvised way, you need to connect with them in a very special way. You need to really understand what they did before, and you need to build on it. And there is an activity actually to train you to do that, where in the beginning, and unfortunately we can't do breakout rooms, otherwise we would let you try it, where in the beginning you ask a pair to come up with a dream vacation. So, what would be a dream vacation that we actually want to visit? And the only rule is that your response always has to start with a yes, but. So someone says, I don't know, I want to travel to Bali. And then the other person has to say, yes, but I would like to go to Hong Kong, whatever. And then usually you pause after a couple of minutes and you ask people, well, did you actually come up with a destination? And most pairs do not agree on a destination. And they explain the emotional toll it takes when someone always responds with a yes, but. In reality, though, for most of our inner dialogue, we do respond to many situations with a yes, but. So we find reasons why things might not work, or we're concerned about it. And the issue with that is that just the but itself actually negates everything that was said before, if it's in a dialogue, but also if it's our inner dialogue. In a way, it devalues the situation. For sure, it can cause stagnation because right? I mean, you don't build on one another. You basically just
Right.
um, you basically just pull the other person in another direction, and then it gets pulled back. And yes, but it also creates shortcuts. So in an anti-fragility mindset, it's quite helpful to actually, and this is why we put a big sun on it, it's actually quite helpful to think more along the lines of yes and.
Mhm.
So yes and builds on what was said before if you talk to another person, and yes and opens a lot more opportunities for you. I want to say, after this brief introduction into the topic,
Mm.
what I'm sharing here is very much, of course, my own opinion. It is rooted. It's based on work that has been done, you know, by Nassim Taleb, for example, who I'm quoting here quite a bit, and Dr. Paige Williams, who wrote a beautiful book about antifragility. But the reason why I was so relieved that I found the concept of antifragility is because I myself could never align with the resilience movement. Something
Mhm.
around the resilience strive, the way it became such a mass phenomenon, something in that really left me longing for more and left me quite frustrated. And
Mhm.
so I was so relieved when I first heard about the concept of antifragility. And I will explain why, and I will also explain the difference between resilience and antifragility. And this is why I brought the Rumi quote at this point in our talk, in our conversation, because whatever I say, please just take with you what is helpful to you and leave everything else in this webinar.
Mhm.
I really do not believe that I'm right and someone else is wrong, or the other way around. But there is a garden beyond right and wrong where I would like to meet you, and maybe just what I'm sharing with you will spark some thoughts around it, around the topic. So, who first came up with the term anti-fragility? Well, it was actually Nassim Nicholas Taleb. You might know him. He has a number of bestsellers, but I think his best-known book is called The Black Swan Theory. So again, use the chats if you've read it.
Mhm.
And if you've read it, you have my deepest respect, because I tried to read his book twice. I never managed to go beyond page 80 because I always felt I had to read it with a dictionary at the same time. So I find it's really tough reading. The bad news is his book on antifragility is equally tough reading, but there are a number of really amazing podcast interviews. And talks that he gave around the concept. So if you want to familiarize yourself with his thoughts around antifragility, I really recommend the podcasts and the talks a bit more than the book, unless you really enjoy reading quite dense books, then
Mhm.
absolutely go for it. It's really fun. And he was the first one actually to phrase the term. But like I said in the introduction, I think it is now much more relevant, even because we are in a period of AI, of artificial
Mhm.
intelligence. We're in a period of real transition and real change. And so many of the challenges that we face in systems and organizations personally, and of course also senior leaders, actually require us to have an anti-fragility mindset, and
Mhm.
to be aware of our own anti-fragility and what we can do to nurture that. So, what is
Mhm.
antifragility?
Mhm.
Antifragility refers to the ability of a system, an organization, or an individual to not only withstand shocks and stresses, but actually to grow and improve as a result. And I think this is human nature in many ways,
Mhm.
actually, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, I would agree. Yep.
Right. And it is about, I mean, thank you, Elaine. Yes, absolutely. Splitting up with a partner and finding my husband. It is really about embracing the unpredictable and chaotic times as an opportunity for development, enhancement, innovation. And this is so easily said. And it's
Mm.
so hard to really do
Right.
it time and time again. Somewhere along the way, I studied organization psychology, change leadership at Columbia University, and I remember we did a sort of change quiz, and one of the questions was, um, people are refusing change, yes or no? And most of us thought the right answer is yes. But in all fairness and all truth, actually, the right answer, according to organization psychology at least, is no. People do not refuse change. We as people actually embrace change, especially when it's happy change, like some of you, right, found new love, when we fall in love, when we feel that we really own the change, when we feel that we can really drive our response, when it's things that we enjoy, like a new hobby or a new haircut or whatever it might be. But something around the pace of change, I think, has made us quite tired in embracing change. And so I thought this concept of anti-fragility really helps us embrace it in a different mindset. So if anti-fragile systems thrive in chaos and actually lose quality when we shield them from it, isn't almost every living ecosystem that you can think of anti-fragile? And Robert, you're absolutely right. People refuse being changed, right? When it's passive, when we can't control it, this is where it really makes a difference. But if you think about your muscles, if you think about our immune system, most ecosystems that we can think of actually under stress, they usually come out stronger. But what is interesting is when we're not stressed and when we're shielded from it, that's actually when we become weaker. And this explained the whole idea around comfort zone for me, because in my coaching practice, I very often work with people who've been in a similar position for a long time. And I would say that they've been in a comfort zone for a long time. And usually your radius of action and your radius of impact doesn't stay the same, but it actually becomes smaller. And I know, John, right? This is something that you measure
Yeah,
impact and you
yeah.
measure culture. This is absolutely something that you also find.
Yeah, you do, and it's so unfortunate to see, and it has in many cases, it has the best of intentions. The organizations and leaders want to create a workplace that's people feel safe and comfortable, and a lot of times we unintentionally create a setting that's unchallenging to them, that doesn't require me to really, use my skills and leverage, and learn and grow over time. So even a lot of times, even with the best of intents, we end up creating systems that become fragile because of that attempt to create safety and security and, yeah,
Yeah,
consistency.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's the antidote to evolution, I would say, right? So
Yes.
Taleb itself, he distinguishes between three categories when he talks about anti-fragility and when he talks about systems: fragile, resilient, and anti-fragile systems. So fragile system, I think, is quite easily defined, right? It's like a glass of water. When you smash it to the floor, it breaks. So fragile systems are basically damaged by stressors. Resilient systems withstand them. So you already have a first hint around the resilience movement, right? So
Hmm.
resilience system withstand them. And anti-fragile systems benefit from it. And I just have a quick question. We will come to this afterwards. I don't know if you see this. John, what is this called in English? Is it a flume? What is this called? It's like one of these, bouncy balls. Is that what you call it? Is there a term for
Oh,
it?
yeah, just a rubber ball, I think.
A rubber ball. Yeah. So
Yeah,
this is a rubber ball. This is a bouncy
yeah.
ball. And
Mhm.
as I talk about anti-fragility in the next couple of slides, I want you to reflect on whether this rubber ball is an anti-fragile, a fragile, or a resilient system.
Mm.
I would love to know your thoughts on this. So, what is the difference between resilience and antifragility? Well, antifragility really refers to the capacity of a system or an organization to not only withstand the shocks. I know I'm keeping repeating myself, but if there's one message that I really want you to take home, it's that. But actually, it grows and grows stronger and improves as a result of stress and volatility and shocks. On the other hand, in resilience is about recovering from difficult times. It's about withstanding the stress and resisting change to some degree. Not 100%, it's not completely clear cut, but it's really about
Mhm.
not being harmed. It's about staying healthy. Essentially, staying though in the same form, in the same essence as you were before. And I think this was always my personal criticism with the resilience movement, that I really felt that it's teaching executives and generally people to withstand change, to stay centered in change, but not necessarily, I think the piece at least that was missing for me was how do you actually embrace it and how do you become stronger. And that's why I was so relieved with the whole idea and concept of antifragility, because it's about reminding us that through difficult times, of course, in a crisis, we just have to survive the crisis. We cannot reflect the crisis while we're in the crisis. But usually the crisis actually helps us to become stronger, better, clearer, and oftentimes also more successful, just like your examples
Absolutely.
earlier. And if you
Absolutely.
want to test whether you are an anti-fragile system or whether any other system is an anti-fragile system, there's a beautiful, simple test of symmetry. It's been defined by Dr. Paige Williams. Her book on anti-fragility I can really recommend. In fact, I believe it's still the audiobook is still up for free on Spotify. If you have a paid monthly subscription, so you could just listen into it. She said anything that experiences more disadvantages than advantages due to a random event is fragile. Anything that has more positive than negative effects is anti-fragile. I love this. I think this is quite a simple rule of thought,
Mhm.
right? Anything that
Yeah.
has more positive than negative effects is anti-fragile. So there is a number of different stresses. We all know them. I just listed them for completion's sake, right? We can be stressed in a physical way, in a psychological way, in a social and environmental, or in a biological way. But there are a couple of core principles that we can all embrace to foster more anti-fragility. And there are a couple of points here that I find also very relevant when I work with my executive clients around defining strategy and a path forward with this concept of anti-fragility. And this is where I would like to start with the bottom. I would like to start with the fourth one, non-predictive decision making. I love this idea that stems from anti-fragility, that instead of planning towards different scenarios or forecasts, you should actually invest a lot more time in the preparation of the adoption. So what does it mean? Instead of planning how AI, for example, can impact your business model and have different scenarios, maybe a best case, worst case um, scenario, it's a lot more effective, says anti-fragility, and I believe it's true, to actually think about how do we adapt.
Mhm.
What ecosystem, what environment do we need to create to really adapt to this change? How can we invest resources and time into this change? Which actually brings me to the third point, so the redundancy point. In anti-fragility, it's really essential that we have enough backup resources to always be able to walk a different path, to try out a
Mm.
different alternative in times of stress, when certain paths are not possible anymore. So the idea really of I actually have spare capacity, have spare resources that allow me to flex when I need to is quite a strong principle as well. And then again, in my own consulting and coaching practice, most of the time I'm called when really there are no resources anymore, when people are under such severe stress that for the first couple of coaching sessions, what we really need to do is we need to recharge batteries. We can't really get to the core of the work. So this idea of keeping backup resources and try out alternatives, I really embrace that. I love that. And then the point of optionality is also linked with that, is how do you maintain flexible and agile as much as possible. Again, thinking along Viktor Frankl's lines, it's really no matter where you are in life, no matter what your circumstances are, there will be some space to make choices. I give you quite a crass example from his own life. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talked about his choice of always saving a piece of bread and not eating it, knowing that the rats might actually eat it throughout the night, but saving it because he knew that if he had a little bit of something in his stomach in the morning, his day would be better. So even in environments where you have very little
Mm.
flexibility, and very little room to maneuver, there will still be some room to maneuver. So always just maintain your perception around your response and the opportunity to respond in a certain way in uncertain times, especially. So, what are your options of action? And then, of course, overcompensation and growth. Um, really think about the growth constantly, and the adaptation and the opportunities that you find within the growth as you respond to the challenges. So it's much more around what can I not change, but what can I change? And when I'm through with this, who will I be? What will I have learned? Like some of you have shared, I actually also went through a divorce. It was very helpful for me to imagine my life after the divorce, to imagine what maybe opportunities or chances I might have, what life I could lead that I maybe did not envision. It's not always that easy. I think it depends very much on your emotional state. But it's really something that I think these four core principles of antifragility can be very helpful. And I know this webinar is up, and feel free to take screenshots of the slides. We can also send you the slides. But I think these four principles, if you had them up somewhere on your phone where you can look at them in difficult situations, they might be quite helpful. For executive leaders, just concretely, I really think that anti-fragility pushes leaders to have different perspectives, maybe to think differently about decision making, power making, boost innovations. There is an article around anti-fragility that we published on Forbes.com. You can check it out. It's really about anti-fragility for executive leadership. But again, for many of my executive leaders, it's quite important to pivot in times of AI and in times of political change. And actually also climate change, the climate crisis. So there is if you want, I perceive a new openness for these topics. I just have one more reflection slide for you, because I've talked at you quite a bit now over the last 15 minutes. And I would like to just take a couple of minutes again. And again, feel free to use the chat if you want to. I warmly invite you to do so. I would love for you to really think about which areas of your life could benefit from more flexibility and anti-fragility. How can you incorporate small challenges into your routine to strengthen your anti-fragility? What could be small challenges, small elements that you could introduce to have a small dose, homeopathic dose of stress, to actually improve your anti-fragility? And maybe how can you increase your own freedom of choice in decision making and maybe also career planning? So just a number of areas for you to reflect on. Thank you, Caroline, for your feedback. And yeah, again, I would like to, if that's okay for everybody, just to give you 2 to 3 minutes. And again, we will do this in silence. So those of you who are more introverted, you have a bit of time just to think as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, if you want to share anything in the comments, please do so. I I hope you found it helpful just to reflect on some of these questions. I have a couple of thoughts and inputs and maybe recommendations for you. So I will spend the last couple of minutes of this webinar talking through some impulses, maybe some suggestions for you that might be helpful. You will also have a chance to scan a one-pager that we created for you, where you will find the essence of the material and some of the reflection questions and useful links later on. So, feel free to scan it with your phone to direct you directly to the document. And then, John, we will have a bit of time also for some questions. So, excellent.
Absolutely.
Dr. Paige Williams, who I've quoted before, she, in her audiobook, she made some really useful insights and suggestions around how to become more anti-fragile. And this is really a bit of a laundry list. This is not super well structured. It's actually her thoughts together with my thoughts around it. And I just want to talk about some of these items. She said, which I loved, she said, tackle the infinite game. She said, let us let go of the illusion of control in our life. That in a decade of disruption that we've all lived through, we know we are playing an infinite game. Of course, we will not be here indefinitely. We all know that, right? Part of life is our own death. But until then, we really go more in circular motions than in linear motions. And we oftentimes believe that the slide that I showed you earlier with riding a bike, right? Our plans are sort of more or less a linear path to our goal, when in reality, that is not the case. And so I love that. She said, don't play to win, play with the boundaries. And I love this concept of playing with the boundaries. How can you use the boundaries that maybe you set yourself or the environment sets you? And how can you just like a rubber band, how can you actually expand the boundaries of your life? How can you push the boundaries a bit out? I love this idea, because winning is binary. You win or you lose. But pushing the boundaries, pushing your comfort zone, pushing yourself slightly out of it, that is a whole different ball game, I think. So tackle the infinite game. She also talked about break the negative. Now, we know that at any point in time, our unconscious brain activity, so that's also your neurological networks and so on, actually use about 11 million bits per second of energy. Now, our conscious brain, on the other hand, only uses, in the best case, when we're not stressed, when we slept well, when we're well nurtured, 40 bits per second. So to understand that our unconscious mind, our unconscious brain is driving so much more in our decision making every single day than our conscious brain, I know that this is something that is well proven. But I think just a relation between those two numbers is so crass, it's so strong, that hopefully it inspires you to really pay some attention to your inner thought processes. Do some work around your own beliefs, your own limiting beliefs. Do some work around your inner landscape. Understand that whatever you perceive as a reality is not going to be, and you see that an operated reality is not a reality. It's actually what you construct in your mind. So to have good instruments that help you challenge your perception in a moment, that help you come from a maybe yes but to a yes and, these will be super helpful strategies in all sorts of moments of your day. And there are a couple of tips that we use from bias awareness work, for example. So you can flip it to test it, right? How would I react if this happened to a friend? How would I react if this happened not to me but to, I don't know, celebrity? What would an my anti-hero do in this situation? What of my experience can I reuse or upcycle or recycle? How have I gone through a similar experience before? So it's about tinkering in small steps. It's actually not about planning for the worst case scenario, because again, this will not help you. It's really about dealing with a small dose of the negative and working with it at time on end. So this is break the negative. Operate reality, I already said it. Really always test the data and always test your perception of reality, because we know that we are not perceiving reality. And we know it because there's been so many different studies that have been performed. For example, Johnson from Lund University, he did an experiment where people had to choose between two pictures based on attractiveness, and they had to basically say which person they found more attractive. And afterwards, the scientist actually presented them with precisely the picture they did not choose. And 70% of people found arguments why they chose a picture that they never chose in the first place. So we know that our brain is constantly playing tricks on us. Operate in reality as much as possible, get data, get insights. That is really helpful. And of course, it's really important to understand that we can use risk intelligently. So really be comfortable with failure, be comfortable with the prospect of failure. Just know that the knowledge you might need is not yet present, but it will be present afterwards. Again, this is not about big life decisions that you want to get right, but this is a muscle you can train every single day with so many small decisions. So this is just a couple of points that I wanted to highlight from her thoughts and her her insights. John, is there something you would like to add to this?
No, excuse me. No, not really. Without a deep dive into our tool, I mean, it's just nice to see so many parallels between
Yeah,
these concepts and the tools and models. This is such a nice way to introduce the idea of around risk and adaptability in organizations and in leadership roles and broadly.
yeah,
Focusing on what we can control, recognizing that the external environment may be out of our hands, but focusing on what we can do, what we can learn, how we can adapt, how we can try different things. It's great, and it really is. It's all psychological as well, right? And that's connecting directly with that internal versus external locus of control. Perception is in there, and that's all right within human synergistics models as well. So I love having this, and I think for most of our clients, they need both. Not only the sort of data that they get from HS and good numbers and information, but the narrative and the theme in terms of how do we understand this, how does it apply to us, our business, and I love this concept particularly as a fantastic way to connect those dots and create that a clear journey forward in terms of why are we moving in this direction? How is this going to help us? How does this lead our people forward?
thank you. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Mhm.
There is no good concept without a 10-step list. So I have
Yes,
I
yes,
have a 10-step list for you. Some
love
of it
it.
is quite intuitive, right? So please don't take it literally. It's just we needed a 10-step list, so here you go. There are a couple of pointers that you could use, and you will find that on the one pager as well. I'm not going to run through the 10-step list because I think it's quite self-explanatory. I really just want to say, closing with my actionable tips, it makes sense to think about antifragility as a mindset, and really start identifying areas of your life or your work where you are rigid or brittle right now, and where you could expand a little bit more into the anti-fragile mindset. Experiment with using small control amount of stress. So that is really important. Cultivate a diverse set of skills in crisis. So remember, actually every one of us has already lived through tough times and survived it. Going back to my first reflection question set, um, the skills that you've learned will be useful and will be available to you every time. So just make sure that you're aware that you have those skills and those abilities and how you can apply them. And then really taking time just to reflect on our responses to the challenges usually opens up and broadens our action radius, and it really allows us to respond to the challenges in a different way. And I would like to really just thank you for listening to my talk on antifragility. I believe it's a powerful framework, and I think it is a bit of an antidote to many of the challenges that we face right now. And so hopefully it gives you a little bit of food for thought, if only philosophical, in how to thrive more in today's complex world and work. And really starting small, I think, is the best approach to many of
Mhm.
these items. And last but not least, I promise there is a one pager. So we would just leave the slide up while we take your questions. You can just scan it with your phone and it will direct you directly to a PDF that you can download. That is, well, actually be quite a one pager, but it might be a two pager. But there is a document that summarizes the whole concept for you. And with that, John, I would like to hand it over. We have about, I think, 12 or so minutes for any
Yeah.
questions.
Well, thank you so much. Fantastic topic. I think that's very, very helpful. And again, gives us
Oh,
a framework to understand. Yes, please.
the rubber ball. I
Yes,
forgot to
yes.
ask the rubber ball.
Uh,
So I would love for you to just, again, because we can't unfortunately talk directly to one another, but give us your thoughts and your responses. Is the rubber ball fragile, a robust, or an anti-fragile system? I'd like to know. Let's see. So again, while we could answer some questions, just write your responses. And John, I would love to hear your thoughts.
yes, yes, happy to. Let people, anyone who wants to put their ideas in the chat. Well, from my side, I would guess that the rubber ball is anti-fragile. It seems to me that it's coming into contact with its external environment. It's shaping and adapting to that, and then using that energy and conserving that to rebound in a new direction. So I would argue that it's anti-fragile.
Interesting. See, I would argue that it's robust
Yes, because
because
it itself doesn't change.
itself does not really
Yes.
change. But I used it as a statement in talk recently. I was talking at a conference. I held a keynote about this topic, and I
Yeah.
used it as an absolute statement. And then someone walked up to me and said, "Well, I'm not quite sure because as it hits the ground, it has to adapt a little bit its shape, and then it bounces back." And so now I prefer to just ask the question as opposed to just give you
Very
the
good.
answer. But for
Yes.
me, it's a great metaphor of a system that in itself is quite resilient,
Hmm.
but not anti-fragile, because
Yeah.
it doesn't
Very good.
grow, it
It
doesn't
itself
become
doesn't
unlike
change.
maybe a snowball. I don't
Yeah.
know, a snowball, at least in winter. But so for me, this really is a symbol of the difference between resilience and anti-fragility.
Very good. Yeah, I like these
Yeah,
thought experiments. It's
exactly
good to have
right.
some analogy for what we're seeing in our
Yeah,
businesses and in our
yeah,
teams.
yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. I'd love to see any questions or additional questions from anyone in the chat. I'm going to try to hold myself back. Like I said before, so many great connections between the human synergistics model and psychological motivations around satisfaction and security, and what you're talking about in fragility. Again, we can't control what happens to our organizations, the external, but we can focus on how we respond within. We can make hopefully thoughtful choices, question the things that we've done in the past, the patterns that we've been using. um, are those really leading us forward? Is there another way? I love your questions around things like, not trying to see things in a win or lose, but rather trying to find the boundaries and push the boundaries. A lot of times I find in organizations, we have a very linear, and I loved your analogies in the beginning about with the bike ride and so on. There's a very linear focus forward in terms of where we think our business is going in the next, 2 to 5 years. I've been doing this work long enough. It's very interesting how conversations with leaders around, anti-fragility or adaptability and change have changed over the years. It used to be I'd talk to them about a 5-year plan in the future, and they could be very clear on where we're going to be in 5 years or even more. Today we're talking about 2 years or 1 year or what there's so much change that we can't it's not helpful necessarily to have those long-term sort of fixed targets. It's much more helpful to have a direction in terms of where we're going, but be able to adapt and flex with that. And it's not only externally in terms of our direction forward as a business, but internally. A lot of times we want to have everything very clear and succinct and clear processes. And while that can be helpful, there's a point at which you sort of reach diminishing returns. And what you start to do is sort of bake in a rigid mindset and a rigid pattern of how we approach customers, how we solve problems, how we work together or don't as members of the business. And those rigid patterns ultimately, in my experience, become risks to the organization because we're not accustomed to trying new things, adapting, and that sort of rigidity, that anti well, that would be the fragility, that kind of fragility in the system. It's sort of a matter of time before those things start to break. And given the pace of change today, it really is forcing, I think, organizations to um, move away from those kinds of, more fixed structures, long-term, concrete plans, and be more adaptive and flexible and roll with the punches that come from outside and learn and grow. And that's really always what brings out the best in people. But it seems to be, for better or worse, something that's a greater requirement of the business environment today. Good, very good. All right. Well, thank you for all of the input from the audience. If anyone has any additional comments or questions for Sabina or myself, please feel free to reach out. Sabina, I can't thank you enough for talking on the topic. I absolutely love it. Find it very interesting. I'm going to be incorporating several of these things into my own
I'm glad.
day-to-day practice. Reflection was very helpful.
I'm glad.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for having me. It was
Yes,
lovely to be with you again, John. I always enjoy it.
thank you. It's a
And
wonderful
have a wonderful
collaboration. Thank you.
day, everybody, and Happy New Year. I think we can still say that on the 14th of February. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes, yes, indeed. All the best for the new year for everyone, and this is a great opportunity to start the year off in a less fragile mindset for all the change we all know is coming ahead. So all the best to everyone, and thank you again, Sabina. Wonderful, wonderful
Thank
content.
you. Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.